What's up, everyone? Today on the podcast, we have Mark Hilinski, father of Tyler Hilinski, former Washington State University quarterback, who tragically died of suicide at the age of 21 in January of 2018. I'm so honored to be able to talk to you today, Mark, and really on mental health and the awareness that I want to bring to Hilinski's Hope Foundation that you guys created to honor your son. So first, again, thank you so much for your time. I'm just really sorry again for your loss and everything that your family has had to experience. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it.
It's my pleasure, Paul, and thank you for those kind words. It doesn't seem to get any easier, but as part of our continuing mission at Hilinskis Hope is to keep Tyler's name alive and to try to destigmatize where we can kind of this issue. So I applaud you and anybody that really is trying to, have this conversation. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I think first thing I want to just talk about is about Tyler. Tell us about Tyler. What was it like with him as a kid and as a young adult? I'd just love to hear more about him.
Yeah. Oh boy. I could spend all day on this one. Tyler was the middle of three kids. He and my oldest son, Kelly, are about a year and a half apart. And then Ryan came along a few years after. So he grew up sort of wedged between, the oldest A-type personality and, the young baby. And I have to tell you, when we talk about him and think about him and see old movies and stuff, it's exactly how we remember him growing up. He was the easiest, sort of the softest, spoken. He was the peacemaker, helping around the house. He was just that kid. And not that the other two aren't awesome, and I love them all, of course, but Tyler his personality was a little different. He was just a little bit easier going. He didn't like a lot of, confrontation, but he didn't shy from it either, if he was protecting his brothers or his family and that kind of stuff. But growing up, he was a smart kid, loved all sports. He was extremely, athletic and outdoorsy. So, bike riding and motorcycle riding and at the beach, trying surfboards and bodyboards and, in the typical sports that you'd have in most communities or in schools, baseball, basketball, football. He loved to play them all and played soccer and stuff as well. And he was really the best way, if you can picture a young guy, he was the one, mom's yelling, dinner's ready, and he's out in the driveway taking one more shot at the basket. That was his deal, sort of a gym rat for all sports.
That's awesome. And so he played a bunch of sports in high school. Football obviously was the main one. Was there a point when he kind of decided it was all football? Was he a 3-sport athlete in high school?
Yeah, I think early on, when he was young, he sort of had that fast twitch, muscle, speed, agility kind of combination when he was young. And as he got older, as kids would specialize or would sort of pass him up, he wasn't as competitive in soccer, for example, or maybe basketball. All three of the boys really played, primarily while they played all sports, they played competitively in travel baseball and certainly in football. So I would say, around the age of, as he's leaving grade school to high school, he made a choice. Tyler in particular made a choice to sort of leave baseball behind and focus on football. And he just really enjoyed, being on a team, a big team, loved the sport, loved the dichotomy of something that can be really sort of violent at the same time, very strategic, and love the guys he played with. And I think that continued to help him excel in football. And I think he also had a natural, I don't know, a gift that you work on, but he had a lot of arm strength and arm talent for those sports, and
Yeah.
football was kind of the one that he had the most fun doing. So never had to drag him, never had to wake him up, never had to get him ready for practice. He was right there with the cleats by the door with football under his arm, ready to go.
I love that. I love just how like competitive and dedicated he was, even if it's just the last shot in, before dinner or just ready to lace him up and mix it up with the boys. I think what's really important and why I want to have this conversation is that there weren't really signs. And what I hope this conversation creates and helps create is that one, an awareness of self-advocacy to come and speak up, and just to be aware that you might, even though if things on the outside seem perfect, you're the quarterback or you're playing, men especially, it's okay to go and talk to someone, but then also on the other side of the coin, to kind of make people aware, to maybe look for things. And I just want, that conversation to be had. I think athletes are particularly susceptible, especially football, because you do have that tough exterior and you do have to always be, as a quarterback, the leader. And you can't, maybe there's that stigma that you can't be vulnerable.
Right.
I know I too myself was a student athlete at Washington State University, and people would always be like, "Oh, you have everything," and there's not that space, or that it's almost like you're not allowed to feel. It's like, "Oh, you have that full ride scholarship. How can you complain?" But I know myself. As soon as I heard the news, I texted my buddy that I played baseball with, and we were both, really sad. And I know it affected a lot of the community, not just Washington State, but the NCAA and the nation as well. And so I just think it's really important to realize that just because you're the star quarterback, just because you're an athlete, just because on the outside things look like things are great, it might not be, and it's okay to not be, and it's okay to go talk, and it's okay, to ask someone how they're doing, because that's the other side of the coin as well.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really important point, I think, and you're right. You're exactly right about Tyler. I mean, we've been doing this for about 18 months now since Tyler passed, and one of the things that we continue to see is there's groups of folks that have, student athletes in particular, that struggle with mental illness of some varying degree, and some of that is something that teammates, coaches, friends, neighbors, other students might catch on to. Just the routine's different. You're sleeping more. You're self-medicating. You're compensating in some way with what's going on underneath without ever telling anybody. And I think, and through Hilinski's Hope, we're supporting and trying to bring a level of training and coaching, if you will, to share those insights and how, one of the statistics that grabbed me early on was they asked some teammates and friends of a few suicide victims that whether or not they had noticed any change, and in one of the studies prior to the death by suicide, 70% said that they had. And then when they asked why you didn't say anything, or did you say anything, 100% said they didn't. And the reasons were the reasons, as a former student athlete, you would know, but you don't want to get, coach mad at him. You don't want to be the tattletale. You don't want to get him or her upset with you. And then lastly, it's what struck the hardest is they don't know what to say.
Yeah.
They, talking to his teammates. So now specifically about Tyler and his teammates, they said, we didn't see that, but Tyler's in the minority. I think that there's a lot of kids that exhibit symptoms or signs, or for that matter, seek treatment and help and still die by suicide. And it's just, it's completely tragic. On Tyler's case, and in cases like that, or like his, where nobody saw it, or if they did, like we did, we noticed a little bit of change, but it's hard to distinguish between struggles at school or with friends or on the team or whatever as being, suicidal. How do you get from, if 1,000 is suicide and, you get a parking ticket, and you lose a bowl game, and you get in an argument with your girlfriend, that drives you to like 150, like
Yeah.
how do you go from 150 to ending your life in a short period of time? And it's extremely hard. Obviously, Kim and I aren't mental health experts. We've spent the last 18 months around them, and we continue to work with them to help build Hilinski's hope. But in that particular, in the question, sorry, to get back to the answer to the question, in my mind at least, is you do it. There's plenty of good work around self-help, and I think we're making some good strides in being able to sort of knock down. Our goal is to eradicate and make mental health on par with physical health or orthopedic health. But you're right. So you get two choices. One is, or you have to do them both, in my opinion. But two choices. One, you have to help the kids and the student athletes identify when they're not feeling. What's the difference between having a bad day and having a suicidal day? So if you catch that, or you see that early enough, is there an opportunity to get help and seek help and ask for help? And I think this is part of the stigma around mental illness. You don't know that you have terminal cancer until some doctor verifies that you do. You're not feeling well. You're not quite sure. And I'm not comparing. I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
Nobody goes out and looks for that. But it's diagnosed over time. In this case, particularly in Tyler's case, Tyler was gone before anybody realized he was struggling. But that's not always the case. So yeah, you gotta help the student athlete identify and ask for help. And part of that is destigmatizing mental illness. It's also having the resources available within the university system that you're in, to get help if you decide to do it. And I think in Tyler's case, it's very likely, again, we don't have all this, but it's very likely he didn't want to disappoint people. And the experts we've talked to, we'd go, wait a minute, but dying by suicide is disappointment. And what we've learned, and what the experts have said, is you don't understand depression. You don't understand the level of change that goes on, physiologically within your body, that, you don't think about your friends and family, and you just want out of the burden of this pain.
Yeah.
And Tyler, you mentioned it. I mean, such a great game against Boise, had a terrific comeback that we didn't end up winning on the road against Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Loved his teammates. I mean, this is a kid that just loved being part of the Coug family and loved being part of that team, and wanted to lay it all on the line every time he got out there. There was no chance that he wanted everybody to crawl on his back, and he was gonna do everything he could. How does that kid not ask for help? That's a tough one. That's a lifelong question, and one we're likely to not ever get an answer to, but we're not going to stop trying.
Yeah, totally. I remember that Boise State game, triple overtime. That was a fun one.
Yes.
You spoke to resources and education. If you'll get on staff, I remember as an athlete, you had your physical therapist, you had your nutritionist, you had strength coach, you had so many people dedicated to getting you in the physical top shape. So many ice baths, so many different technologies. I want to highlight the gap to your point. Is it a psychologist? Is it an education on mental illness and mental health? What is that gap like, and what are your thoughts on that, and what could shift, or what is shifting right now?
Yeah, it's great question. There's a wide, first of all, from a resource perspective, you just kind of summarized it nicely, that they're not on par yet. And part of that isn't just a lack of resources, it's a lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. We refer back to the NCAA, which we've partnered with, and their best practices. And one of their best, just to address one of the points, one of their best practices is to have a sports psychologist on staff. You know, one sports psychologist for WSU's 465 student athletes is not enough. So they need a staff themselves. They need counselors and trainers that are doing nothing but looking out for the mental wellness of their student athletes. And they don't have that. And that's not to pick on WSU. They're in the majority. Most schools don't. So I think of the 120 Division I schools, there's less than 30 that have a sports psychologist. So let's start there, right? So does that solve all the problems? It doesn't. But it tells, the message it sends to the team is, my nutrition's really important, so we hired a chef. You know, my ability to throw a seam route against cover two, I got a quarterback coach.
Yeah.
We can all, we can fix ACLs and ankles all day. We got the best orthopedic surgeons, and we know what that routine looks like. You tear an ACL, there's a process and a surgery to fix it. The mind and depression and anxiety and bipolar and a lot of the sort of sub diagnoses that in Tyler's case was never diagnosed, but there's not a lot of there's not the same level of understanding on how to treat that, how to identify that by either the student athlete or the staff. So I think, to your earlier question, it's great if everybody that was sick and not feeling well and mentally ill and needs therapy or treatment, if that's available, knocking down the stigma for them to self-identify and ask for help, I think that's really important. Second is training the team and the coaches to identify when the student athlete can't do it him or herself.
Yeah.
So look, so that's second. Third, there's some new technologies out there, including brainwave scanning and blood testing, that will isolate and help identify high-risk cases, maybe that the student athlete doesn't see and the teammates and coaches don't see. And I think this problem isn't going to be solved in the next 5 or 10 years. I think this is really a long-term generational change, right? So it starts with knocking down the stigma all around it, so we can have these conversations without warning people that, hey, this is going to be really difficult to hear or to talk about. We've managed to do it. We've made so much progress in so many other areas. This is one of those that really needs some consistent resourcing and funding and some leadership in the space. So we're none of those things. We're trying to do the best we can to support the schools that are interested in making mental health and wellness for the student athletes a priority. And I think in our case, I should say also, Paul, we focused on the student athletes because our kids were student athletes. That's not to, trivialize anybody else that's struggling. We just, you can only bite off so much and sort of
right
on, and we've been encouraged, to sort of stay in that path because, our experience sort of lends itself to that. But again, there's so many young people, we lost one again earlier this week in Hawaii. And, from the little bit that I know and have talked to people about, a very similar situation, caught everybody by surprise and, just tragic all around. So I think we have to invest in the training process that we can. We've got to improve our ability to use technology in a way that will help identify higher risk kids, student athletes, and we've got to have a system in place at the universities to process these. I mean, we heard one statistic where an urgent or life-threatening mental break, if you will, where do you go? You go straight to a hospital, and they're not equipped to deal with it either. So there's a big gap between how we handle mental health and wellness and how we handle everything else on football. And you identified a bunch of them. And I would add, there's money and resources there. If we can put 17 different helmet, jersey, pant, combos together, we certainly can help our student athletes in this area better than we are.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit on 2 points. One, the generational thing. Everyone that's a decision maker at a university, the coaches, the staff, they grew up in a generation where mental health, I didn't grow up in it, so I don't know, but I would guess it was not talked about as much as it is today. If you look at the 70s and 80s. And
Yeah.
so, to your point, it is going to be a long process, but I think the people growing up now are being exposed to it more. Mindfulness is being more prominent, meditation and stuff like that.
Sure.
And then to the other point is the trickle down. You're right. You can't only really fight one fight and focus and niche, but I think it also has a really cool impact on a community, a university, when someone like the quarterback or someone that people look up to in an athletic standpoint is saying, I use this tool to help practice mental health. Maybe that gives someone else permission to do the same.
No, you absolutely got it. And I would add one other kind of component to it, and that is, the non-team sports, the golf and tennis, and although they're played in a team format in college and high school, it's really a singular sport, right? So these guys have been seeing, not these guys in general, but those sports in particular have utilized sports psychologists to improve their drives, their backhands, meditation, visualization techniques, and so forth. And it's never been frowned on. In fact, it's always been sort of the secret weapon for a lot of these guys to get past some of their physical limitations and let their mind really work as freely as it can on the course or the court or the field or wherever that may be. And so it's not new. And I think if we added to the mix that high performance for student athletes includes their mental wellness,
Yeah.
then we have, I don't want to call it a Trojan horse, but we have the permission, if you will, the permission of the students themselves, the coaching staff and the university, that they're judged by wins and losses. We're not stupid. We get that. It's an economic driver for a lot of the schools. So if we're out trying to promote their mental health and know that they play at their top level when they're feeling their best and are void of distraction, that type of stuff, then I think we have a vehicle that will occasionally identify people that need help in this area,
Yeah.
right? So you wouldn't have in the doorway of your football operations building, you're not going to have a suicide preventionalist title above a door, but you certainly can have mental preparedness and performance improvement, etc.
Yeah.
And going through that are some of the same steps that would help identify when there's a cloud there. And so I think between the technology, the training, and the research, and this idea of mental performance are working together in concert, you have the ability to improve your performance level, identify mental wellness problems maybe within the student athletes or within the culture, and then certainly a plan to address and fix them. So I think there's a roadmap, however loosely defined, for us to make big gains in.
Totally. 100%. How can people switch gears a little bit? How can people talk about mental health in a way that honors the family and the victim? I'm sure in the last 18 months, you've learned a lot about this compared to before it happened. Can you just talk a little bit about that? So as people have this conversation, they're talking about it in a way that's respectful. I know one of the biggest things that I learned about it was to change, committed suicide to died of suicide. It's not a crime. No one committed a crime.
Right.
Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Absolutely. And that's a great example. You don't commit cancer and you don't commit ACL tears and so forth. So I think, step one is so even the playing field in the way we discuss it. So believe it or not, I really believe that these informational opportunities to educate and to talk about should be as transparent as possible. I would have no problem, all other factors aside, telling you what Tyler's shoulder injury was like when he was in college, or what his knee problem was, or any other orthopedic right? We'd talk about it. How do we fix? Remember Tommy John? You're too young probably, but the Tommy John surgery was sort of the, the last hope for so many baseball players.
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago, people heard Tommy John, that's it, he'll never play again. And now it's almost part of the game for pitchers, right? So many
Yep.
people go through it, and we've gotten so much better at it. So if you look at how long that took on an orthopedic injury that's well known, the techniques improved, the rehabs improved, the research has improved. I think we have to get there with mental health. So you're right. It starts with an understanding that there's no chance. Well, there's less chance that a young person, student athlete that has it all together, or guys that are struggling and women that are having problems. There's no guarantee, but what we know for sure is the stats are undeniable. Suicide in student athlete population has gone up for the last 20 years. It continues to go up. And that's also part of our culture. It's going up across the board for 18 to 25-year-old males, 18 to 34, all the demographics that we can sort of study. The numbers show that we're not making much of a dent. We're not getting any better at this. We have to flatten that curve or that steep climb, and we've got to, force it back down. And one way to do that, of course, is talking to our kids and to the coaches and to talking to the public. Listen, I'm the father of a son that died by suicide, and I still catch myself being careful or cautious. I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to single anybody out, those type of things. And so I think there's a real sensitivity around that, but we're also talking about life and death issues here. And, that's not likely the case with an ACL or with an ankle. And so while there may be far more ACL problems on a football team over the course of a year, they're not life and death problems.
Right.
In our particular case, unfortunately, this ending should have and could have and should be in the future preventable.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to switch gears again and just kind of talk about what Hilinski's Hope has done since you guys started it. What are your current goals, current initiatives, and moving forward, where would you like to get with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, Hilinski's Hope mission statement hasn't changed, and that is really twofold. One is to keep Tyler's name alive, and for us, sort of selfishly, I remember talking to the Coug football players and coaching staff the night I got to Pullman after Tyler passed, and I had this real I was really moved to want to tell them not to be mad at Tyler, which was a weird thing. Here Tyler was gone, and I was still sort of protecting in my mind. I'm his dad. I'm trying to protect him from people thinking ill of him. Like he was weak, or he couldn't take it, or he just bailed on us. And the reality is so much more complex and so much more based in science. Our young student athletes don't take their lives at 21 years old because they had a bad day. These are folks and young people that are sick, and that can be helped. And it's very hard to identify when they can't help themselves. And we're determined from Hilinski's Hope to provide those programs to improve the mental wellness and destigmatize mental illness as part of Hilinski's Hope mission.
Awesome. How can people support?
We've been extremely fortunate in one respect. The Coug family of students, athletes, really professors, so many teammates started by lifting up the family, and making sure we were okay, and telling us how much they love Tyler and all the good things. And I get it. There's a tendency to, you're not going to badmouth a suicide completer. I've heard that term recently. But but that'll wear off over time. If there was something, I don't know why it is, but so many of our young student athletes that go, that the obituaries read like, the perfect child, the perfect student. And a lot of that is, they give so much of themselves. They don't always, look inward and try to, make sure that they're okay. They're so worried about taking care of their friends and families and their teammates, that this stuff, mental illness, is so insidious that it can sneak up on you, and you don't have the tools, and you don't have the, I don't want to call it strength, but you don't have the resources or the facilities or faculties, your own personal faculties, to ask for help. And then you combine that with the current stigma around talking about mental health. What are your choices? To play the sport I love the most, and I tell somebody that I'm having weird thoughts or bad dreams or thinking about suicide, they could lose their position. They could lose their spot. The last thread that they're holding on to, perhaps they don't want to give up, not realizing that suicide is going to take all of those things away as well. So, it's an awful, vicious cycle. And I think that Hilinski's hope in its creation hasn't changed. And that is to honor Tyler by helping others in their with mental illness, and talking about mental wellness and applying those resources kind of nationally. So we've taken great strides to get there. Now, what we're currently doing, with the support of the Pacific Northwest, to be honest, all of Kook Nation, and so many teams and parents and alumni from WSU, from UW even, and across the country. And now that Ryan's over in South Carolina, we've got a tremendous support system there. Where those funds are going is for us to do two very specific things. One is continue to push down and fight for eradication of the stigma around mental illness. And the way we do that is that we come and we talk and we present Tyler's story. And not that Tyler's more special or less special than any other kid, but it's the story we know. And if this can happen to Tyler, it can happen to anybody. And that's not to scare people. The stats are, the math is the math. There won't be very many suicides next year comparatively to orthopedic injuries. But again, the difference of missing a mental illness opportunity to improve could be a life and death thing. So we focused on eradicating that by telling Tyler's story and sharing it with him. The second piece is a little more complex, because we've partnered with a group in North Carolina, a research facility that's helping us build actual content and programming for the students. So, for example, one of those is bystander awareness. So the folks that are closest to them, teammates, coaches, roommates, students that see them, every day, or see her every day, that notice those changes, empower them and give them the tools to be able to address it. And I think that's incredible. And the NCAA has a program called Step Up that we've paid for to be on campus. We were on campus with it at WSU, and I think it's incredibly effective. So we're using our resources to do both of those things. And I think our partnership with the NCAA gives us a very specific guideline in their resource handbook, which is for us to follow, which is what are the best practices in mental health, and being able to support that by building training programs and educational material that'll improve that. Again, this is incremental improvement, but to improve that immediately is our goal. You can't walk in and look at somebody without taking their temperature, blood pressure, height and weight, when you think about going to a doctor's office. And I think Kim and I and Hilinski's Hope want to go in and do the surgery, go in and fix everybody and leave it, at a better place. And what we've learned over 18 months is, unfortunately, that is not possible to do immediately. What you have to do is to build a sustainable and research-based and evidence-based program that will allow that training to be effective, measurable, and sustainable.
Wow, that's awesome. If someone wanted to donate, do they just go to the website? Is there social media that people can follow as well to get
Yeah,
updates?
the hilinskishope.org is the website. There's a donation button there. We maintain a Facebook page for Hilinski's Hope. Kim and Kelly and Ryan and I help her with Instagram and Twitter, and we're constantly trying to share our story and our path a little bit, to remind people that Tyler's gone and we're living with the aftermath, as is our extended family and friends, and we've all changed and we're all very different now. And I think by making that a little bit more public, it only helps to identify this can happen anywhere, and so let's treat it with respect, and let's put some real resources behind it. But I would also say and we do in fundraising, you can't do this research without the smart people doing it, and so that costs money and time. But what a lot of people can do that can't donate or can't donate much, it's every bit as important to our mission to get those stories, to hear how talking about Tyler's story has either helped you, or if you have a story to share that you want out there. That information is being fed back into all of our training programs, and we're collecting that obviously anonymously, because it's not the individuals aren't as important as to us in the training. I should say they're obviously the only thing that's important, but getting that information and using that to improve, that's critical. And then anybody that wants a Hilinski Hope band that can't afford one, or doesn't have the opportunity to donate, we're happy to give them and provide them, because we want people to be able to talk about it. And so if that's number one goal, is to eradicate the stigma around talking about this stuff, then we want to enable everybody to be able to do that. And if that's something, hey, what does that stand for? I see you're wearing a bunch of bands. I have one for this and one for that. It allows you to sort of repeat that story. And
Yeah.
I think that's been really, really helpful and effective. And to have those of us that aren't sick with mental illness to need to pick up the torch and start allowing those that are suffering to talk about this and find resources to help them, and do it in a way that's protective of their, of them as unique individuals, but also to not be ashamed of it. We're accepting in our society, if you've got a drinking problem or a drug problem and you go into rehab and you complete it and you get better, there's nothing but prayers and cheers and celebration and so forth. There should be no difference with mental illness. This shouldn't be stigmatized in any way. So
Yeah.
I think that's the critical piece, and it's bigger than we thought, to be honest, Paul. It's like I said, I think it's a generational change, and you and your audience are those young people that are going to make the biggest difference, in my opinion.
Awesome. I love that people can send in stories anonymously. I'll definitely make a note for people to do that if they would love to, because that's a really cool way to help with that research. Mark, again, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
If I'm repeating myself, I apologize. I would on behalf of all of us, I mean, Kim and I and Ryan and Kelly, we're extremely, I think, grateful, touched, thankful for the support from the community, from so many people. And it's tough. Life's completely different when you lose anybody, but certainly when you lose a child to suicide. And so we want to always remember that, and pass along our thankfulness to the people that have continued to support in any way they see fit, and are able to support Hilinski's Hope. So we want to pass those thanks on to them if we could.
Absolutely. Mark, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on and talking about Tyler, about Hilinski's Hope, and honoring his memory, and hopefully making a change for a greater future.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, Paul. Great job. I appreciate being able to come on and talk with you today.
Just want to thank everyone that has listened to this podcast. I truly believe that you are the people that are going to help make mental health conversation around suicide and meditation and practices that allow people to have better mental health. Like Mark said, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen with $1 million grant. It's a generational thing, and it starts with you and I and everyone else having conversations and being vulnerable and allowing people and letting people know that if they are struggling, there is a way out and that they can talk to someone. And if you're struggling as well, you can message me, you can message anyone, and we'll get you the help that you need. Hopefully this podcast, shed some light on things, help bring awareness to a bunch of different areas around student athletes and the need for mental health to be on par with physical health. And as Mark said, you can go to the website, hilinskishope.org. You can also check out the links in my website, downdogathletics.com, where I'll link to all the different ways that you can support and participate and get bands and shirts and everything else. And again, just thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Hope to catch you next time for another episode of the Down Dog Athletics Show.